Hello and welcome to another episode of Spotlight Sessions. My name is Ilan Fisher. I'm the host, and I also head up our nonprofit partnerships at accessiBe. Today, I'm going to be having a really epic conversation with Emily Yates. Emily's got a really awesome background as an accessibility consultant, as a journalist for some really major publications like the BBC, The Independent, and BBC Radio as well as working, consulting some really large corporations in the UK. So there's a great personal connection for me. How's it going,
Very
Emily?
well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Emily, I kind of gave a very brief, it doesn't even scratch the surface of the amount of work that you're doing and the amount of projects you're involved in. But do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, about your disability, about kind of your work and also your studies at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name's Emily. I'm 30 years old. I live in Glasgow, Scotland, and I'm a wheelchair user myself. I've got cerebral palsy, and I work as an accessibility consultant for a design agency called Mima. We work on many different projects with many different kind of disciplines. So I can tell you all about that a little bit later. But I also do some freelance work in terms of journalism, etc. And I'm also studying for a PhD in women's studies, where I'm looking at gender and disability and the intersectionality of that at the University of York.
That's epic. And how did you get involved with being an accessibility consultant? Because it's not really a role that I imagine that you fall out of straight out of uni. I'm not sure if there's graduate schemes to be an accessibility consultant.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I studied English as an undergraduate, and then as a master's I studied disability studies. So that was learning a little bit more about the policies and the politics around disability, and all of that interesting stuff. And then it was really, honestly, by luck that I fell into this. So I volunteered at the London 2012 Paralympic Games as a games maker. And from then, I was quoted by Lord Sebastian Coe, who was part of organising the Games. I was quoted in his closing ceremony speech. And from there, I was invited by the British Consulate to go over to Rio to speak to different organisations, NGOs, etc., before the 2016 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And as I was giving talks and communicating with different organisations out there, I was offered to go to an interview for Access Consultancy for the underground transport system that services Rio de Janeiro, and they were looking to build a new line to go up to the Olympic Park. So it was absolute luck that I got that job and was able to live and work in Rio on and off for 2 years, which was incredible. And then from then, I've just carried on in this career.
That's amazing. And it's very funny when you were describing that. I was thinking of an interview we recently had with Isaac Harvey, who's also from the UK, and he was telling us how the steps that the Transport for London has made. So how was it like coming into the Rio transport system? Like, kind of what was the before and after?
So before I arrived at MetroRio, there were, I think, 5 out of the existing 36 stations that were physically accessible for wheelchair users, people with mobility impairments, etc. And when I left, 34 out of 36 were accessible. So we really did struggle with those final two, just due to existing buildings and the amount of, I guess, distance underground that a lot of these stations are. But I think what was really exciting for me was this was the first time that I managed to encourage an organisation to think not just about physical access, but also sensory, cognitive access and social access, building confidence and trust in the disabled community, whether they were locals or tourists or athletes, making sure that they were reassured to use the metro service was a big part of my work.
And that's a really important point because when I think a lot about inclusive design, I think inclusive design is really about building trust that people can return to your physical place, they can return to your website by making a really accessible experience. So how can people build trust with the disability community on to use their goods and
Yeah,
services?
I think that's such a good point, and I absolutely agree with you. Inclusive design, yes, it's about making products and services that appeal to a wide range of people, but if you don't have that confidence and that loyalty, that doesn't mean a lot of the time. So I think for me, it's about ensuring that deaf and disabled people have representation so that they're able to see and be aware of people that have come before them that are loyal customers and trust a particular brand or product. I think that's really important and often forgotten. And that's something so easy that organisations can do on their social media, for example. I think that's really vital. But I also think it's about ensuring that whatever you're doing for inclusion externally, for your customers, for your passengers, whatever it may be, you're also doing internally. So you're ensuring that your recruitment process is inclusive. You're ensuring that you're trying to maintain and recruit disabled staff members, people with additional access requirements. So you really are practicing what you preach. And I think that authenticity for business and its inclusion really does come through, and deaf and disabled people really do see that and appreciate that.
For sure, and I'm really starting to see a lot more. You know, maybe it's because I'm in the industry, or maybe it's really a growing trend, and you can kind of talk to this as well. Is there's a lot more representation of people with disabilities in quote unquote mainstream culture. Like yesterday, I saw J. Cole just put on his YouTube channel a basketball player who has a significant physical disability. So we're starting to see that trend there. Is that something that you've seen happening in the past couple of years? Do you think that's something that was triggered by a particular event, or yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on
That's
that.
a really good question. I think I absolutely agree with you. I think it's increasing, and I think it's happening, and I think it's positive. And I think one skew that I've seen recently that I really like is we seem to be moving on from this inspirational representation that admittedly we see a lot with the Paralympics. If you're an athlete, you're a superhuman, and how does that actually relate to the normal disabled person on the street? Are they still seen as a benefit scrounger or someone that doesn't cooperate and add to society? And I think finally we're managing to see a bit of an authentic representation of disability. You see a lot now in TV shows, disabled actors who are there and they're not necessarily playing a character that's just a disabled character. They're playing a character that just happens to have a disability. And I think that is the authenticity that we needed to get to, that I'm finally starting to see. There's a long way to go, but it's nice to see that that's happening for sure.
For sure. When you were describing that, I think of the We the 15 campaign, because I was watching that and showing it to everyone. And I was like, this is awesome. This is the conversation that people should be having. And kind of back to your day-to-day work, what is Mima's design consultancy, and what is your role, and what is kind of the greater mission of the agency when it comes to inclusivity?
Sure, great. So, MIMA is a multidisciplinary design agency. So, we have an access and inclusion team, but we also have a human factors team, an ergonomics team, a wayfinding team, an interior design team. We focus on lots of different elements within the design process, and we work with lots of different businesses, organisations, from Heathrow Airport to we've worked with football clubs, we've worked with Dubai Expo 2020, we've just delivered some training modules for them, for example. We work with a lot of different companies, and one of the companies that I'm working with at the moment is the National Railway Museum that's based in York. And in terms of my work in particular, I guess I kind of focus on three different elements. First of all, physical access, so supporting architects, supporting businesses themselves to ensure that physically their infrastructure is accessible and inclusive to disabled customers, passengers, but also disabled staff members. I also work a lot with what we like to call social accessibility. So thinking about that end-to-end user experience and the mentality and perception that often surrounds disability or other protected characteristics, and how do we make that more positive? How do we increase the comfort and the confidence that surrounds disability? So delivering workshops, training, etc. That's really important too. And I guess the final element that we look at is digital accessibility as well. So this is something that I'm learning in and I'm training in as I go, but very much looking at web access audits, social media hints and tips, etc. as well. And we also deliver things like standards, policy documents, we write empathy building guidance. So really anything that a business or organisation might need externally or internally, that's something that we like to think that we can provide.
So that's really amazing, and you're obviously touching a lot of different areas. But one of the areas that kind of is new to me and something that I'm learning more about is what you talk about in social access. So for people who don't know that much about social access, can you explain to them a little bit about what that means and what, the end-to-end user experience could look like professionally?
Absolutely. So I think personally in the UK and probably in a lot of other countries as well, we have finally started to get our heads around physical accessibility. So that built environment, that infrastructure. But that's accessibility, that's the ease of access, entrance, exit, etc. It doesn't really focus on that feeling of inclusion, that positive user experience. So whilst it might be great to ensure that there's ramps, automatic doorways, lowered signage, seating of an inclusive height when you're going through a building or a transport environment, what actually you also need to ensure is that any staff member that passenger or customer kind of comes across is really well trained in their empathy, in their disability awareness, that people are able to go out of their way to support somebody should they need that without being too overbearing or patronising. So a big part for me is being able to say, actually, as a wheelchair user, yes, all of these physical elements are absolutely vital. But actually, if I go into a space that's really physically accessible and a member of staff treats me like a second class citizen because I'm disabled, suddenly that lack of social access means that the brilliant physical access kind of equates to nothing, and I probably won't be going back.
I really love and resonate with that answer. It's kind of when I think about, the accessibility journey. It's not like, okay, you've made your physical space accessible, or you've made your website accessible, you've made X accessible, and now your journey's over. You still have like a lot to learn, and I've been in this space for close to 2 years now, and still learning and kind of disarming those ableist
Yeah.
thoughts and I would even say reactions. So there's definitely so much more to be done. So really, what I wanted to ask Emily is what accessibility means to you.
So I think for me, accessibility means an equitable, not necessarily an equal experience. So having the understanding that actually not everybody starts from the same starting point is really, really important, whether you're focusing on your external accessibility or your internal accessibility. So if we just think for a minute about a disabled member of staff that's working in an office, what reasonable adjustments might they need to be able to achieve their potential and to be able to have an accessible working environment? That could mean having dictation software on their laptop, having a height adjustable desk, for example, even having a British Sign Language interpreter at certain meetings and events. They're all examples of an equitable experience because you're understanding that actually in order to be able to have the same equal experience to their peers, somebody who has a disability, who has extra access requirements, might just need something else in order to be able to reach that level. And I think moving away from this idea that if we just give everybody exactly the same resources, that's fine, that's equality. Actually, that's not the case, and it's not going to lead to equal experiences. Only a vision of equitable experiences is something that's really going to achieve inclusivity.
I really like that answer. That was like
Well,
amazing. And we've kind of touched on really what my last question is going to be in a lot of your answers. But when we're speaking about the business community, what can the business community do better um, to the disability community? We spoke about the physical locations being improved, but again, we also need social accessibility to improve. It's about, the representation when we're talking about media and marketing, how that's improving, but there's still work to go. So what would be like just the overarching message you can provide to the business community,
Yeah,
be it in the UK or worldwide? Because I'm sure it's different in both areas.
yeah, got you. Okay, so I think one of the biggest things that I still feel like I have to get across to businesses when I work with them, or even when I visit a business as a customer, is the power of the purple pound. So this is quite a UK centric model, but it absolutely relates globally as well. And the purple pound basically says that disabled people and their households have money to spend, and that figure, I think from the top of my head, is currently worth £274 billion per year to UK businesses alone. So
Wow.
if you're not accessible, if you're not kind of promoting inclusive policies and practices, then you're missing out on a chunk of that purple pound pie. And whilst in my heart of heart, in my morals as a disabled person, I kind of say to myself, well, why would businesses need to know this in order to be accessible? Surely they should just want to do good and want to do the right thing. But let's be honest with each other, a lot of businesses still run with financial thoughts at the very, very top. And if, as an accessibility consultant, I can help promote access and inclusive practices through explaining and teaching about the purple pound, I think that's a really important point, because access and inclusion, yes, it should just be an ethical thing that everybody does, but actually it also promotes a positive, profitable business model. And I think when businesses realise that, they are just a little bit more keen on making sure that you know, their building, their services are more accessible and inclusive.
And I think even the argument of the purple pound is just, that's the starting point. Once you start that conversation and say, okay, we're going to do this for, let's say, financial reasons. Once you get to know more people with disabilities and the disability community, then that's going to move into wanting to make your assets accessible for the quote unquote right
Yeah.
reasons. Emily, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been a really insightful conversation. And lastly, if someone wants to get involved with you, collaborate, follow you, learn more about Mima, how can they do
Yeah,
so?
sure. And thank you so much. It's been a lovely conversation. So, MIMA is www.mimagroup.com. That's our website, and you'll be able to find all the information that you want to there. You're more than welcome to have a look at my website, which is emilyroseyates.co.uk, and I'm Emily Rose Yates on LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect and collaborate. We're always up for that. But thank you so much. Really, really interesting to have this conversation.
Awesome. Emily, thank you again, and until next time.